All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Let's Be Neighbors for the County Library. This is a place where we bring in local experts for community engagement and just to answer your questions on topics that are important to you and help you guys better engage with your community. So tonight we have the legislative process from idea to law. And with us, we have two incredible presenters. First, we have Victoria Ashby, who is the general counsel for the state legislature or the Utah legislature, and she can introduce herself further for any other details, but she knows her stuff. She's the top person in the OLRGC, which I cannot remember what it stands for, but I'll let Victoria say what that is. And then she's going to talk about the legislative process and how ideas come in. She's the inside perspective for all things of committees, the legislature, all of that good stuff. And then we have Claudia Lay, yes, Leoesa. I apologize if I did not say that right, Claudia. And she is the Planning and Policy and Engagement Coordinator for the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs. And she's going to just talk about how you can engage and ways to engage with the legislature in as little as 5 minutes. And we're so grateful to have them here. And I will turn all the information over to our experts starting now. So take it away, Victoria.
Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to thank the library for inviting me to come. Anytime I can help people get involved in the legislative process, I love it. I love being at the legislature, but I also just love seeing people who've never been involved before come up and jump right in. And it's really one of the great things about our government is that it doesn't matter who you are or where you live or what your issue is, you can come up and be part of the process. I know sometimes the process can seem a little bit overwhelming, and there's a lot of fabulous jargon rooted back to processes that some people can't even remember at this point. But hopefully I can help you get through some of that. But the main thing I would encourage you to do is to reach out to your legislators and get involved if you can. I actually spent a couple years in Washington, D.C. early in my career working for the U.S. Senate. And while Congress is great and they do listen to their constituents sometimes, it is nothing like the Utah State Legislature. For 14 years have been there, and I have drafted bills because somebody who is a constituent of a legislator emailed their legislator and the legislator opened a bill. And that is just something you're not going to see a lot in Congress. So I think it's really exciting to be part of the legislature. And I want to just encourage, even if it's just watching a committee meeting one day or a House floor debate, to try and get involved in that. So I'll just talk a little bit about my office. It is kind of a weird title. I work in the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. We are a government office. We are the legislature's law firm, basically. We're a full service law firm. We represent the legislature if they're sued. We also write all the bills for the legislature, and we are the attorneys and policy analysts who staff the committees for the legislature. We are a nonpartisan office, so we draft bills for Democrats, we draft bills for Republicans. It doesn't matter. Once a legislator files a bill, we are the staff that processes and drafts and helps craft the policy for those bills. We have two sister offices who are also nonpartisan. The legislative fiscal analysts, they actually try and calculate how much a piece of legislation is going to cost to implement for the state. So legislators have a good idea of the expense that might come with a particular policy. And then the Office of Legislative Auditor General, they are the legislature's auditors who can go out and audit government programs or anything that's receiving public funds. All three offices are nonpartisan, and we take that very, very seriously. One of the great things about the Utah legislature is that it is a part-time legislature. And so these legislators do not get paid. They get a stipend, but you can't make a living being off a legislator. And in fact, being a legislator is a full-time job in itself with very little pay. And so these legislators do not have their own personal staff. We are the staff for all of them. And so we're there to serve them And no matter what their policy objective is, we're there to try and help implement it. But we don't campaign, and you'll never see any of us testifying in committee to try and persuade a committee, because we are nonpartisan. So just a little bit about the Utah legislature. There are 104 legislators, 75 in the House of Representatives and 29 in the Senate. To pass a bill, you need a majority. So you need 38 in the House and 15 votes in the Senate. You have probably heard some news about veto-proof majorities. That's enough votes that if the governor vetoes it, they can override it. So that's a 50-20, or a 2/3 vote for that bill to be veto-proof. Just another term you might hear is, you'll hear about leadership. So each party within each chamber, so that would be the House Democrats, the House Republicans, the Senate Democrats, the Senate Republicans, vote for their own leadership. And that's where the Speaker of the House comes from, or the President of the Senate. You'll hear about the Majority Leader, the Minority Leader, the Whip, and then the Democrats do the same thing. And those leadership positions are powerful positions. They decide who sits on what committees, and are really kind of the bosses of the legislature, as much as there is a boss for the legislature, which sometimes it's a pretty unwieldy crowd. Our legislature, as I said, is part-time, and the founders of our state really wanted people who were coming from different professions and different backgrounds to be able to serve. And so our legislature is in session from the day after Martin Luther King Day to 45 days. So the session is going to end next Friday at midnight, and then they go back to their jobs, although they are continuing to meet over the summer. But the idea is that they bring their expertise to the legislature to help form this policy. And you will have a wide variety of people serving the legislature. There's educators, there are scientists, there are engineers, there's stay-at-home moms, there's all kinds of people, and it really brings an interesting perspective to this policy, knowing that they will have to go back home and hear from their neighbors like you, but also have to live with the laws that they're passing, rather than having a full-time job. Utah's legislative session is one of the shortest in the country. It's 45 days long, and it ends on the 45th day at midnight. There are some states that they actually cover the clock on the wall and pretend like the legislature can control time, which sometimes they think they can. But our session is quick and fast, and it's organized chaos. But the idea is that everyone goes back and they don't turn this into a full-time job, other than those of us who are staff who are serving them. When we're not in session, we're in what's called interim. And during interim, there are interim committees that are subject area committees, like transportation or education, human services, that meet once a month to discuss policy ideas and issues, and then lead up to the next session the following year. So during the interim, we are working on bills for the upcoming session the next year. We're also staffing those committees and providing services to those legislators. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about how a bill becomes a law. This is like going back to Schoolhouse Rock, Civics 101. Just to give you an idea of how it works, a legislator, or in some cases a constituent, will contact their legislator with an idea, something that they want to change. And so the legislator will open a bill file with our office, and it's assigned to a policy and attorney team within the subject area. So if you wanted to write a law about school crossing guards, it would be assigned to our education team. And we will then look at any legal issues around that bill and advise the legislator of that. We never ever tell a legislator that they cannot run legislation because it might be unconstitutional. We advise them of that. And then it's up to the legislator to decide if they want to push back against the courts or push back against the executive branch. It's that checks and balances, and it's in the legislature's prerogative to push back, even if they, if there's case law out there, to see if they can change that case law. More often than not, though, bills are just changing state law, and that's what the legislature does. So we will draft those bills for the legislature, and then the legislature reviews it and decides to number it. Once the bill is numbered, you'll see it's a Senate bill, so SB 100, or HB for House Bill 100 or 120 or whatever. And it's introduced in its respective house. So if it's a representative, it will start in the House. If it's a senator, it will start in the Senate. And then that bill has usually goes to a committee. So if it's a House bill, it will start in the House, go to a House standing committee. Standing committees are the committees that meet during session. So we have interim committees outside of session, standing committees during session. The committee will vote on it. If it gets out of committee, then it goes to House floor. And during this time, every legislator has the opportunity to weigh in, to propose amendments, to propose substitutes, which are really just big amendments. And we would draft those for them, and they're voted on. Once it's passed through the House, it then has to go to the Senate, or if it was a Senate bill, it needs to go to the House. And then Senate committees look at it, and senators can amend it or substitute it. And then once it gets out of the Senate committee, it would go to the Senate floor. If at any point in this process it doesn't have enough votes to move on, then it's just dead, basically. But once a bill gets through the House and the Senate, and it has to be the same bill that passes those. So let's say you have a House bill that gets through the House and then goes over to the Senate, and the Senate committee amends it. Then it goes to the Senate floor. The Senate as a whole votes for it, but it's not the same bill that passed the House. So it actually has to go back to the House. So sometimes you will see bills bounce back and forth until both bodies have voted on the same bill. Once that happens, then it goes on to the governor to be signed. And the governor has a choice. He can either sign the bill, he can allow the bill to proceed without his signature, which still means it goes into law, or he can veto it. And he has 20 days after the session adjourns to decide this on each bill. If he vetoes it, then it would go back to the legislature, and they would need 2/3 majority to override the veto. If he allows it to go into law, then it goes into law. Most bills go into effect 60 days after the session ends. I know Claudia's going to touch on this, but I'll just give you my thoughts on being involved, and then I'm going to show a few things on our website. If you have an issue, the best place to start is with your own legislator. They are more interested in what their constituents have to say rather than someone who necessarily lives outside of their district. And lots of legislators will encourage you to put in your emails when you email them, because they get buried in emails, to put, that you live in their district, or something about their district, so that they know you're someone from their area. So I always encourage the public to reach out to their own legislators first. Then the next place to go is the committee chair. If you are interested in education and you have an issue, the chairs of those interim or standing committees are a good place to start too, because if they're the education chairs, they have a vested interest in that. And then you can reach out to other legislators as well. And when you see very controversial bills up at the legislature, legislators are getting emails from all over the place, or they're getting, phone calls from constituents from all over the state, who have, an interest in this bill, and to persuade the legislature's vote. When you are talking to legislators, be succinct and to the point. They are very, very busy people during session. And so you want to just drive your point home. And I know Claudia will probably give you some tips on that. Keep it civil. People who come to the legislature, it's really hard because some of these issues are really passionate, and people feel really strongly about them, and that is absolutely okay. You want to keep it civil, in part because it's the only way to keep communications and dialogue open with people who have different ideas than you. And the most successful constituents or lobbyists or whomever are able to keep that dialogue civil, even if there's disagreement. And then just a reminder, there's always next session. I have seen some policy initiatives that took 2, 3, 4 sessions, 4 years of really intensive work by passionate people to pass, but they weren't willing to give up at the beginning, and they were willing to go through the hard process of making policy, and they were able to get something passed. And what I always remind people is that politics is kind of easy. It's easy to dig into your political corner and not listen to others. Policy making is complicated. It is really hard to make good policy, to put the politics aside and to try and figure out how to develop law that people are comfortable with, even if they don't love it, that addresses the issues, and that addresses concerns people have with it. I'm going to share my screen now, and I just want to show you some things that I think are helpful on our website. All right, you can see that, I hope. So this is the legislature's website, and we have one of the best websites for public engagement in the country. It's pretty easy to navigate, and it's really easy to see what's going on. And again, this takes some practice to understand what's going on at the legislature, but it really is a useful tool for engagement. So the very first thing you want to do is to know who your legislator is. So if you don't, you can find right here under legislators, find by address. And here I'm going to just type in the Capitol's address. And voila, if you live anywhere near the Capitol, this is your representative, Representative Jennifer Daley Provo, and this is your senator, Senator Weiler. And so now you know who to contact if you have questions or you want to persuade them or tell them your feelings or opinions about a bill. Once you find your legislator, you can just click on them. You can also find out at the webpage, there's an index of all the legislators. And it pulls up this page about that legislator. And so you can see her district, her party affiliation, when she began service, her phone number is right here, her Capitol address is here, and her email address is here. And this is here for every single legislator. The next important thing, you can also see the committees that she serves on and any other additional information, including her background. The next helpful thing about if you are interested in what your legislator is working on is sponsored legislation. And so here are all the bills that Representative Daley Provo is the sponsor of, the primary sponsor. That means she's the person who requested this bill. And you can go through those. You can also see the bills that she is co-sponsoring, which is really floor sponsor. So that means there's a Senate bill. You can see this SB, and she's decided to be the House sponsor for Senator Harper's bill when it comes over to the House. So you can see each of those bills and kind of get an idea of what that legislator is working on. When you click on a bill, you can see a lot of information about the bill. So here again, we see that Representative Daley Provo is the bill sponsor. Since she's a representative, she needs a Senate sponsor as well when it goes Senate. So that Senate sponsor is Senator Bramble. Here's the bill file. It's a House bill, so HB 252. And here is what's called the short title, and it's supposed to be a very brief description of what kind of the general subject area of the bill. Then there's the highlighted provisions, and these are written by our office to try and help members of the public get a very kind of 10,000-foot level understanding of what's going on inside of the bill. And so they're written like bullet points. And then begins the body of the bill. And so anything that is underlined is proposed new law. And so all of this would be new law that she is proposing. Anything that has a strike through, and I don't see anything on this bill, is language in the code that the legislator is proposing to strike or repeal. If there's money appropriated for the bill, you would see it here. And let me just see if I can find a bill. That's the one I just clicked on. That might have an appropriation in it. Oh, I don't see anything here. But here you can see, well, let me walk that back a little bit. So that's kind of the body of the bill. As the bill moves along, like I said, there's amendments and substitutes to it. So this bill had an amendment to it. What you see here with this House, H meaning House, and the arrow is that the House at one point decided to amend the bill. And so as you go through bills, you can see these amendments taking place. You can also see the amendments just over here. And so you get an idea of how the bill is changing as it moves through the process. What else you can see is the status of the bill. So if you click up here on status, you can see when the bill came out of our office. The bill was numbered but not distributed. Actually, that was probably a little bit earlier. Anyway, the bill becomes public. Then it goes to the House. You can see that it then went to a standing committee. It went to the House Health and Human Services Committee. Then that committee voted on it. And if you clicked on this, you would be able to see the actual members and how they voted. Then it went to the House floor and it passed out of the House. And this is the vote. Again, you can see how people voted on it. And now it's going over to the Senate. And so you can see the life cycle of a bill by clicking on this status and have a kind of an idea of where it's at. If you want to listen to the hearings and debates about the bill in committee or on the floors, you can click on this link and it will take you to the minutes. It will take you to audio. You can see all those debates about the bill. The last thing I'll show you about a bill is the fiscal note. Like I said, our sister office, the legislative fiscal analysts, do a fiscal analysis of each bill. So the legislature has an idea of how much that bill is going to cost. And so here under related documents is a fiscal note, and they do an estimate of what they think the bill will cost the state to implement if it is passed. So the legislature has an idea of that and is looking at it as far as the budget goes. Another thing that you can do on our website is you can track bills. So if you create an account, and you would do that right here, and also up here at the top, very top right corner, you'll see a login. You can actually create your own list of bills, and when something happens, like a House committee votes on it, you'll get a indicator or an email of what's going on with that bill. So if you want to create your own customized list of bills, you can do that. Another way to look for bills other than just going to the sponsor is you can do a keyword search. So right here, I clicked on bills and it brought this up, and then I did a keyword search. And so I'm going to just search for dog. And our office tries to put the right keywords to these bills. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we're a little bit off, or there's a lot of kind of wild categories out there. But this is a pretty good way to find bills based on a certain subject. So I'll click on this first one, animal care amendments, and you can read all about this bill and what it's going to do. Again, you can see the sponsors. You can see that it's been substituted. That's what this is. Again, a substitute is like a big amendment to a bill. And so what you're seeing here is that substitute because it's been adopted by the legislature. And so now that's the version of the bill that is moving through the system. The one other thing I will show you under the bills is the reading calendar, which isn't going to be super awesome right now because they're not in session. But if they are on the House floor or the Senate floor, you can actually watch what's going on down there. And so you could click on this. You can see voting boards. There's all these different calendars that I'm not going to get into about that they have to actually push bills through to make sure there's enough time for legislators to think about a bill. But you can watch what's going on if you click on those reading calendars under bills up here. Just a couple other things that I think might be helpful. Let me click on here. If you go to research and legal, but that is not quite what I wanted, unless you want to look at our office directory. If you go to, I'm having a hard time getting around the WebEx thing. Okay, here we go. And maybe, I don't know why I can't mouse over to those strips.
If it helps, you can drag the share screen across so you can see it, because sometimes, yes, it does hide links. Anyway,
okay. I think I got it. Well, let's see. Let me just try it one more time. So if you go to research and legal and then legislative information, there's a list of resources, and this is kind of a good user guide for beginners. And the place I would start is this legislative guide. There's how a bill becomes a law. That again describes the process I talked about from going to the House, to the Senate, to the governor. You can also look at this glossary of terms and find out all the weird jargon that goes on at the legislature to have a better understanding of what they're talking about. You'll hear them talking about circling a bill. That actually means that it's in the Senate floor or the House floor and they want to hit pause. So back in the day, they had a chalkboard and they actually circled it to show that the bill was on pause to keep it there so it didn't get lost. That's circling the bill. We don't do that anymore, but they still use that phrase. So this is kind of helpful if you're trying to figure out what they're talking about at the legislature. And then I think this frequently asked questions is a helpful resource too. Again, it goes through some of the topics I talked about, but you know, I think if you're kind of new to the process, this is also a good place to start. Last two things I'll touch on is first our calendar. Like I said, the session moves really fast, but when all the committees are meeting and what's happening each day is up here on the calendar. And so you can see the committees that were meeting today. If you click on this, you can see what bills they were talking about in the minutes that they did and use it that way. You can also watch the floor debates when the House or the Senate is in session and they're having debates on the floor. You'll see up here in the left corner a button you can push on to get to those reading calendars and to watch the video of what's going on. And then the last thing I'll just point out, like I said, there are interim committees. Again, interim is what we do outside of session, and then the standing committees are what they are meeting in during session. And then there are also appropriation subcommittees where they're making the budget decisions. And one interesting thing about the Utah legislature is that unlike, I actually think we may be the only state that does this. Every legislator sits on an appropriations committee and helps make decisions about the budget. There are other states where you have to be one of the lucky ones to get on the budget committee. You don't ever actually really have a say. Every one of our legislators is on an appropriations subcommittee and is giving input to the state budget. But if you ever want to see what's going on with the committees, you can click on them. The interim committees, you can see the list of them here. And you can look up past interim committees and what they've done by clicking on the year. You can also see what their agendas are coming up. And same for the standing committees. Those are the committees that are meeting right now during session. They're debating bills. Here's the list of them. You can follow them. You can see what's on their upcoming agendas. And if you are interested in participating in a committee, when the committee is actually meeting, there's a link here where I can't do it right now because they're not in, but you can participate and you can click on this and actually zoom in. That's one of the great things that actually came out of COVID is that we have more virtual participation and viewing of these committees. I'm going to stop there, and hopefully that's giving you a better idea of how to navigate the legislature's website and get more involved, and I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Thank you, Victoria. That was an amazing crash course of the legislative process, and it is actually a lot easier to navigate than I thought it was, which is awesome and remarkable. So thank you. So yes, anyone who has any questions, feel free to start writing them down. Otherwise, right now we're going to switch over to Claudia, and she will talk about different ways that you can engage in the best way to engage in with your legislators. So take it away, Claudia.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. So nice to be here, and incredible presentation from Victoria. I learned so much, and this is kind of what I've been surrounded with, you know, day to day. So goes to show that there's always something new for you to learn when you have that mindset that, you know, you're going to have a continual learning journey. I think that's a great outlook on life. So thank you to Salt Lake County Library as well. I am an avid library goer. I frequent the Daybreak Library quite a bit with my 4-month-old. We love the children's books over there, and I just just a lover of libraries overall. So I am going to share my screen because I do have a couple slides to share with you all to just kind of explain a little bit more about what it means to engage with the legislature and with the session overall. And hopefully you can all see my screen. WebEx is a new platform for me, but yeah, feel free to stop me, Heather, if at any point my screen isn't showing what it's supposed to. So yeah, so this is all about understanding how to get engaged and just on getting started, and really kind of revolving around the idea of sharing your story for making an impact in your community. And I think, Victoria mentioned just the process, right, for a bill potentially to start with an idea, and it could be that you email your legislature, right, or you could talk to them in person, and then that's the spark, that's the start for something that could eventually become part of our state code, part of our law. So my work specifically is with the Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs, and I just wanted to give a quick overview as to the work that we do. I, like Heather mentioned, I'm the Planning Policy and Engagement Coordinator, and we work across the state to promote inclusive and equitable climates for our communities, and we do one of those things through policy and research, and it's really based on inviting everyone, especially folks from underrepresented communities, to see themselves and find a place in being able to impact their communities in ways around civic engagement. We also have all these different pillars, as you can see. We work with our youth leaders. We have different events throughout the year based on college and career readiness, as well as civic engagement. And we help our different state agency families as well, just better understand, how we can reach folks in a more informed way. So this is all kind of a crash course in the state organizational structure, because I think that's part of civic engagement as well, knowing how the system works and who makes up state agencies or state government in general. And I think sometimes we typically think of politicians, which are part of the system too, but we have different departments and divisions that are part of those departments, like the organization that I work with. So the Department of Cultural and Community Engagement is kind of our hub. There's 8 different divisions and organizations as part of that department, and the Division of Multicultural Affairs is one of them. So we're really happy to be part of this family. This is kind of an overview of our staff and the commissions that we work with. So I have just a wonderful team that I have the privilege to work with, and our director, Nubia Pena, has a very unique role in state government because she's both a division director, but she's also a cabinet or senior advisor for Governor Cox and Lieutenant Governor Henderson. So we're kind of stepping in 2 different worlds, sometimes with her work with the governor's office, and it's opened a lot of doors for us to be able to help, just state government overall serve people better. So we also have 2 different commissions, the Utah Martin Luther King Jr. Human Rights Commission and the Utah Multicultural Commission. And I list these because these are commissions that you can actually apply for. If it's made up of community leaders, community members that have an interest in either Dr. King's, legacy, promoting that sense of civic engagement and participation in your community. And our Multicultural Commission is an additional arm to some of our policy priorities, which I'll get to in a second. So that's an invitation to anyone out there that just hasn't, a desire to get more involved in their community statewide. These are 2 wonderful ways to do it. I can put a link in the chat to some of the applications for how you can get involved. But with that, I'm going to go on to this next slide. And this kind of outlines our focus around policy and the legislature, right? We're really all about increasing awareness, education, and access to resources for communities to be more civically informed. So all that I'm going to share today is for anybody that is, like I mentioned, just really, really eager to get involved and find ways to make their stories and their experiences, relevant and heard when it comes to making decisions that impact us directly. So we increase awareness of legislative action through our website. We have a newsletter that goes out weekly during the session as well that we just started this year. We have a variety of resources, like I mentioned, that are really based on education. Victoria mentioned so many, and I'm really excited to have the recording of this video because it's just going to add to our ever-growing repository of things that people can engage with and work through. And we're a centralizer, right? So we centralize information, we centralize resources that communities across the state can use, specifically related to civic engagement. And I know that government has different tiers or at different levels to it. So we work with city, we work with county, regional, and state governments as well. So this is just kind of a crash course on how our theory of engagement is. And I know it's kind of a lot right now, but we're going to start with just these kind of three key things. So hopefully by the end of this evening, you'll have some practical tips for how you make an impact, the power of your story, right? I know there's I think, a dozen folks right now that are probably from different parts of the county, maybe different parts of the state. And I am, in the division that I represent, we're really of that mind that everyone has a story and everyone has something to contribute to the ever-growing Utah story, right? We're rapidly growing, we're rapidly diversifying, and I know that a lot of that has to do with the individual stories that we have, but also how we bring those together for shared impact. So that'll be this last point that I present, where it's just ways to be more civically engaged on your own time. As a new mom and a working mom, I know all about being pressed for time and struggling to find ways to get engaged in the ways that make the most sense to me and where I am in life, right? So hopefully everyone will find something that works for them based on their schedule, based on where you are, with your own families, with your own, work schedule, maybe you're in school as well. But no matter, how much time you have, even if you have 5 minutes, there is a way for you to get involved with the legislature and policy overall. So with that, here are some key practical tips, and a lot of this is going to just be like reviewing and maybe just highlighting some of the things that Victoria mentioned, since I don't want to be too duplicative, because she did a wonderful job of outlining the specifics. So these are things that, based on the work that I do, I have seen, and with the community that I work with, are really helpful in just getting a good solid footing and understanding of what the legislature does, as well as informing yourself on some of the key actions that happen within the legislature for you to be able to step in, make your voice heard, work through the existing systems for you to be able to make comments, to provide feedback as you can. So number one is learn how to read a bill. And Victoria, like you saw on her screen, went through every step of the bill for the most part, right? And I think that that is a wonderful way to allow you to do your own research, right? And I'll go into a little bit more about maybe the language and some specific things that have been helpful to me in just breaking down how to, break, or how to better understand the large kind of more, I think more formal language, right, that you see in certain bills. But there's a purpose for that, and I think that just as as we're taking these minor steps in getting civically engaged, you have to also kind of give yourself grace and know that it's a struggle even for me right now sometimes to read certain bills. So no matter where you are, there's always, I think, a good footing and understanding for you to be able to better understand how a bill is able to be processed, like Victoria mentioned. But here's where the second point comes in, breaking down some jargon. I know Heather put in the glossary already to some key terms around the legislature. That in and of itself is a wonderful way to just build the vocabulary and have a shared language for building shared vision around maybe some impact you want to see in your community. So I'm going to go through some key ideas there as well. And then stay in the know in the interim, right? So 45-day session, some, shortest, a really short time, right, in comparison to the rest of the year sometimes. So I'll present some ideas too, some resources for you to be able to better engage throughout the year, know when to, maybe reach out to your legislature with enough time to start working on a bill, or maybe have an idea presented so that way you have enough time between, now and the next 10 months or so until the next session happens. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in between. And then finally, the last tip I have for you here is to master your story, right? Maybe there's a cause or a particular issue that you're seeing that you really feel passionate about. And I know that part of the way that we express that story is really a key way to humanize the policies that end up coming out of the legislature. And I'll have a key example later on of an experience I had a couple weeks ago with a Day on the Hill event, and I can explain a little bit more about that as well. So with that, I'm not going to spend too much time on the basics of bill reading since Victoria did a wonderful job. But some curious and interesting things that came to me when I first started to get engaged a couple years ago, even in high school. I was always so confused about the numbering right on the side, and it just seemed just like a very foreign concept to me, because everything just seemed overwhelming at first. But there's a purpose for these things, right? So sometimes when you are trying to reference a specific line in a bill that could be 700 pages long, like I'm just putting out a very big number out there. It's so much easier to say, go to line such and such versus, scroll down to page 650, fifth paragraph down, right? So there's process and there's a reason for some of the ways that bills are set up. And this specifically is something that I pulled from the legislature's website. Have already a really great toolkit that we based our policy resources off of. So, we've got the line numbers, amended sections, and Victoria went over if it's underlined, it's new, if it's struck through, it's going to be removed. And there's an effective date, obviously, right? This is a shorter one, right? So definitely things to keep in mind as you're just mastering the basics of bill reading, because that I think is a good start in just better understanding what could come next, and how the legislature is going to impact you, right, the rest of the year beyond these 45 days. So again, the next tip was to break down the jargon, right? Some key terms to know, build your vocabulary around the legislature and how language is used. So I love that Victoria talked about circling the bill, because that's exactly what I was going to share, right? That the circling, right, was something that was prefaced because of how it was done before on a chalkboard, right? So this kind of has just been continued to adopt over the years, and I'm sure that our language for the legislature is going to change in coming years as well, based on what we see now. But with the readings, right, I think that's something for me personally confused me at first. For a bill to pass, there has to be 3 different readings. And it just by reading, it just refers to the stages of the legislative process, right? So the first reading is required of all bills, all resolutions, and it's basically done by the Rules Committee, which every bill, and Victoria, please correct me if I'm wrong, I know you're the expert. It starts in the Rules Committee, and then the Rules Committee from there kind of determines where in committee it goes, which specific committee around the topic, right, it's going to be reviewed. So that's where the second reading comes in, right? It happens in the House, and then it ends up having a committee recommendation, and then from there, the Senate is able to take it, debate on it, review some possible amendments, maybe some substitutes. And then from there, we have a final reading, the third reading, which is the final phase in the consideration of a bill, which has another debate around it, and then they determine if there's other adjustments or amendments that have to be made. And then it's taken to a final vote before it is, like Victoria mentioned, taken to the governor for either his signature or for the veto. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that maybe get thrown around, especially if you end up attending a House or Senate hearing. It's really great, I think, to just have the vocabulary in mind. So that way when you enter that space or when you start to engage more proactively, you have that shared understanding of what these terms mean. So, and this is where the staying in the know idea comes in, and just I think some maybe not as at the forefront ideas of how civic engagement happens during the session. I mentioned the concept of Days on the Hill. That's something that many organizations, nonprofits, those that are political in nature, right? They host events that could be a full day, could be a couple hours, where it's really just about a specific topic that is important to that particular organization, and then they, with members of the community that are interested in that topic or cause, are able to engage the legislature more effectively that day. Sometimes they visit them, they have lunch with them. There's different opportunities for a legislature to engage with folks that can present on specific topics. So the Utah Asian and Pacific Islander Day on the Hill happened just a couple weeks ago on Valentine's Day, actually. And I had the pleasure of being able to attend that day, just to kind of walk through and then better understand their process. And a story that I wanted to put out there is, so now Senator Karen Kwan, I know she used to be a representative, and through a special election, she got elected to be senator, which I'm sure was a big change in the middle of the session. But something that she was able to do with members of the community, as you can see here, was have folks attend the committee hearing on a particular bill that she was hoping to pass, which was on cultural wear for graduation. So, students being able to wear things like leis, different, regalia. I know there was a similar bill passed last session for Native American students. And I'm using this just as a way for you all to see just how you can kind of envision yourself in engaging with the legislature, and it can be as simple as sending them an email or going to the Capitol and meeting them in person. But it could also mean just showing up for a cause that you care about, right? And a lot of the people that you see in this photo are business owners, students, families, stay-at-home parents. And something for me that is going to stick with me forever is all the ways that you see in this photo. And I know this doesn't capture everyone there because there was a lot more, but they were donated by a local business, which for me, and I got a chance to talk to them later on, they told me that they had never engaged with the session before, and they had been in Utah their entire lives. But this was a very creative way, I think, for community to show up for something that they cared about. And in the end, we were able to, have lunch. Senator Klein and a few other representatives and senators were able to come through and just talk, right, and receive stories, receive experiences about how this bill was going to impact them, impact their children. And in the end, it just brought a lot of great opportunity to, I think, connect with the communities, right, that I mentioned that were going to be impacted and especially affected by the bill. So I think that is something, if you're interested, I would be happy to connect to you, have some organizations that maybe depending on the causes that you care about, recommend those to you as well. But some other ways for you to stay in the know are to bookmark some helpful news media, newsletters, podcasts, or even social media pages to follow throughout the year. These are some that are I think really great kind of in-depth or even just like general overview information type things. So KUER has a podcast called State Street, which is just every week there's different topics that are presented based on what's kind of especially relevant during that week. Some week it might be a specific bill, other weeks it's just kind of breaking down. And I think one of the first episodes was on just what is the Utah way. I know that's something that's used quite a lot in the legislature, and maybe over the years it's changed. So great way to just kind of get your feet wet, I guess, in terms of what certain terms mean, what are some mentalities, right, as you're entering the session. The Hinckley Report is another favorite from our friends over at PBS. They have a podcast as well as a PBS show, so something that you can watch on your just streaming on your TV, on your phone, on your laptop. And every week it's a roundup of kind of everything happening in Utah around politics, around specific folks that are advancing legislation. And then the Utah Policy Newsletter, and I'm happy to put all these in a wonderful email for Heather to share with you all. But generally, right, it's just important for you to kind of keep in mind that although a lot happens these 45 days, the impact and the effects happen, after. And that's something to keep in mind, especially as you're trying to just kind of get started on what it means for you to be engaged, because that could be very many different things. And that's where, again, your story comes into play. So these are just some key tips for you all to consider in terms of, how you're emailing your legislature or legislative representatives, and especially just preparing maybe an elevator pitch, for lack of a better word, to describe and explain the challenge or anything that's really meaningful to you. And that introduction is really important, right? So introducing yourself, knowing who you are, any relevant information about yourself that you think would be helpful for your representative to know, especially if it's connected to the challenge that you want to explain. So if that challenge is specific to something that is affecting you as a student or affecting you in your job, those are all really key ways to make sure that your representative knows exactly who you are and what you're wanting to accomplish together. And that's where this solution-based mindset comes, right? So if there's a way for you to explain a specific way that you think that challenge could be addressed, try to be as specific as possible. I know Victoria mentioned just being brief, right? And it's very important that you, and this is something that I learned just recently this past session, even just putting like the specific challenge or the issue that you care about in the subject line of your email is really important, because oftentimes our representatives will have maybe 30 seconds, right? They're probably inundated with so many emails. So any way that you can make your message as specific and as tailored to as they're doing it, really. And then finally end with an impact, right? So hoping that your representative is able to read your email, read your text, or however you want to communicate with them. Leave them with what you hope the impact will be because of the solutions or based on what you're trying to propose. Because in the end, it's the stories, right? It's the stories that will really humanize the policy that eventually and hopefully they can co-create with you. And that's where additional tips. These are kind of like the nitty gritty and the more specifics based on what I just shared. Like Victoria said, keep it brief, stick to the highlights if you can, especially if you want to weave in a narrative or a specific story around what you're experiencing. Imagine that you're describing what you're seeing as a movie trailer, right? Just keep in mind that whatever you introduce, right, in your story should move them, right? Emotion is great to incorporate, but maybe not overwhelm them. So if you're practicing your own speech and you find yourself overwhelmed, maybe just take some time to review with yourself. Okay, maybe there's something that I can rephrase or something that I can pause on, so that way as I'm explaining or as I'm communicating with them, I can get my point across without becoming overwhelmed myself, right? And then motivate your story with hope and solutions, right? So frame your story in a way that is going to help you feel empowered as you're explaining and as you're sharing. And in the end, make sure to make that ask, right? Like, and I think the slide before mentioned that impact, but be very specific with what that is, right? Is it a vote? Is it a change? Is it a specific program? So that's where I think it's very imperative for you to have this kind of mapped out idea in your head of how you're going to explain your elevator pitch, I guess, to your representative based on the challenge that you want to see addressed, or even just if there's an observation that you have in your community that you feel like this is great. This needs to continue. It doesn't always have to be, problems based. It doesn't have to be something that's missing, but maybe there's something that's happening that's wonderful in your community that you just want to see in a spotlight, or something that you want to see continue to be funded. So I'm gonna end with some kind of very, very key, very, I guess, time-based tips, especially knowing that it's 8 o'clock in the evening, and I'm sure this isn't all that you're doing today. I'm sure you've had a full day of work, school, just being with family. So this is my kind of ending message, that legislative engagement is for everyone, and I'm just so grateful that there are people here so late into the evening, especially as we're facing a winter storm coming up right here. That even if we're cooped up in our houses, there's always ways to stay engaged. And even if you have 5 minutes, it could be starting with who your representatives are, right? And I think the website that Victoria took us to gives you that step-by-step process of putting in your address, finding out who they are, finding out their contact information. And some representatives actually have a newsletter as well. So finding ways to get onto their newsletter to get those updates from them regularly, so that you can stay in the know in terms of what they're advancing, what they're working on. And if you have a little bit more than 5 minutes, right? If you have 20 minutes, a lunch break, or just in between putting your kids to bed, which I know for me is very relatable. Maybe just map out that elevator pitch that I mentioned in your head. Find out which issues are important to you. And that could be with exploring just the different committees and bills right now that might interest you. So if you're interested, right, in finding out, what is going on in transportation, for example, putting in the word transportation in the legislative website and seeing what pops up is a great way to start. And if you have a little bit more than that, if you have an hour, maybe go attend some committee meetings or town halls. And it's wonderful that we have a virtual option, right? So if you're maybe not so close to the Capitol, if it's a couple hours, or even if it's just too long for you to be able to find parking. I know that I struggle with finding parking during the session. So if a virtual option works for you, that is wonderful. That's also, you can also provide comment that way. And if you have all day, my biggest suggestion would be to take a tour of the Capitol, go to the Capitol, kind of be in the hustle and bustle of what's going on. And I have to say that the being in the chambers themselves is really exciting, because you get a chance to see representatives' names on screens, see who's voting, how they're voting. Afterwards, be able to catch them during their lunch break if you can. And on a funny note, where I was able to tune in virtually, so this is something that you'll probably experience both virtually and in person, but there's a little chime that happens when a certain representative votes for a specific bill that's being proposed. And the best part of my day that day was just seeing my baby kind of dance to the chiming. So even if my 4-month-old baby can find legislative engagement fun, hope, and I think that it's something that we can also find joy in and engagement and excitement in. So um, just find ways to stay connected. Here are some ending resources for you all to see this information I presented to you, all in one place. So our newsletter goes out every week, like I mentioned. This is our kind of format that we've had week to week. So we have kind of like a weekly overview, some featured news. We have some bills that are sent to us for people to just kind of take a look at based on the communities that I know we serve. Some helpful resources, right? So a lot of this is pulling from what's already happening and some key organizations and you know media as well that are doing you know a great job and their best to keep people informed. So if you want a roundup like this that is, like I said, very much catered to those that are getting started, because I think that's the best way to keep things accessible. This is where you can sign up for our newsletter, and then our policy resources page is right here. I'll put this link in the chat as well. It outlines our priorities. It does have kind of an overview of how a bill becomes a law in Utah. I wish that we had a video of Victoria already explaining all these steps, because I'm sure that that would be much more exciting. We have all of these more time-based suggestions outlined for you. I only went through just the highlights, but you know you can go in here, take a look at everything that might be relevant to how much time you have to engage. And then one thing I did want to end on too is, like I mentioned, community organizations who we partner with, who we work with, do a wonderful job of trying to kind of like keep folks engaged based on specific topics that they're interested in, right? So if you have an interest in transportation, health, housing and social services, environment, education, you can take a look at the individual bill trackers for those organizations. So that way you can, one, maybe stay in the know in terms of when they're having their Days on the Hill event, or they have their own newsletters as well for those specific topics that might be an additional way for you to stay informed. So yeah, lots and lots to engage in, so many resources out there. And I have to say that as a lifelong Utah myself, I don't know that I truly grasped how incredible and how kind of community-led our state legislature is until I started working for state government. So this is my invitation to you to get engaged and to find ways to fit this into your life, into your daily schedule in the ways that makes the most sense to you. Because I know that the folks and the representatives on the Hill that we have are very eager to engage with you too. So thank you for your time. And Heather, I will pass it back off to you.
Thank you. And that was a fantastic presentation, especially about telling your story and how it humanizes policy. That was really impactful. And thank you again for showing the resources at the end. I put it once in the chat. Oh, you got it again. So, so the quick link for anyone, but the chat isn't saved for our recording, so I'm so glad that that was available as a slide as well. So thank you both, Victoria and Claudia. It was a wealth of information and so valuable to demystify the process and show that it really is approachable. This is the time for questions. So if you've been pondering or mulling over them, start putting them in. We will get to as many as we can. I have a couple on tap as I was trying to figure out this process myself, because I was a newbie and I didn't know much. And so, but we did have one. And Victoria, you've answered it in the chat, but again, because it doesn't save, I'll ask and see if you can answer it again. It is, does an RFA or request for appropriation to the legislature follow the same process as introducing a bill?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same idea. So a request for appropriation is when nothing in state law needs to be changed, but there's a program already existing and a legislator wants to increase or change the funding to that, or do something that's just specific to funding. And so that's called a request for appropriation, or an RFA. That's submitted to our sister office, the Legislative Fiscal Analyst. And it's kind of the same idea. If a constituent brings something to a legislator, or a legislator sees something, then they'll submit that to LFA. And then that is taken to the appropriations subcommittees, who try and prioritize where your tax dollars should be spent. And then as they go through that process, it ends up in a bill. And then that bill, again, has to pass both bodies and then go to the governor.
Excellent. Thank you. And let's see, I don't think anyone else has asked anything yet, so I'll go to our repertoire is, can you propose an idea to a senator or a House representative? Can it be an idea proposed to either of them, or does it have to go through one specifically first?
I can answer that. You get to pick.
Okay, so you
So it
have
can
the
start on
option
either
to, you
side.
can. So
Yeah, it's usually best to, try and talk to both of them because they're both going to care about their constituents. But you can choose either side.
and there isn't a hierarchy of senator is higher than a representative. They are equal parts of the government, correct?
Well, the Senate will tell you they're more important because they have bigger districts, but that's just them.
Gotcha. Um, I noticed this, so this will be a question I had is what does the signature from a governor mean? Is it like an endorsement? Because you said a bill can go into law without a governor's signature. So what's the process for that?
So after the bills are passed, we do what's called enrolling, which is making sure the same bill passed both sides. And then we send the bill to the governor, and then the governor has a choice to sign it. Often, really high profile bills, the governor will choose to have a signing ceremony for, and it's in the fancy, fancy gold room at the Capitol, and people get pens and stuff like that. Otherwise, I mean, there's so many bills. The legislature usually passes around 300 to 400 bills a session. That the governor will just let them go into law and might not necessarily sign them. Or sometimes the governor is choosing not to veto a law, but doesn't want to put his signature on it. And so he just lets it go by. But it's really just the process of making sure that second branch of government has a check and balance on the legislature.
Okay, awesome. And then I will just double check to make sure nothing else has come in. Um, Not yet. And then how early can public read or find a bill? Like, what's the earliest stage that someone can that a bill is discoverable by the public?
So that's a good question. So legislators can open bill files May 3rd this year for the 2024 session, but legislators, and you'll hear about this once in a while. Legislators can choose to keep a bill protected while we're writing it, and there are a variety of reasons to do that. If something's super controversial, they don't necessarily want it out there. Sometimes they're trying to get stakeholders together before it gets kind of too noisy around the bill. So if they keep it protected, we just don't disclose that. If they say it's public, what you can do is go to the legislators page and see the list of their bill files they've opened. And we'll just show you that short title, which again is that short description of the bill at the very top of the bill. You can see that. You can't see the drafts of the bill unless you're working with a legislator and the legislator gives us permission to share those. The earliest the general public will see it is when the bill is approved and numbered. The earliest we start numbering is mid-December. So that's when you start to see the bills come out for the next session, and then they'll just keep coming out. We still have bills coming out now, even though session's ending next week.
Thank you. And since you said that we have like one of the shortest sessions in the nation, when's the best time to contact a legislator? They're part-time, as we learned. Is there a better time? I'm sure that's might hedge on legal counsel. Answer to the best of your ability.
I'll let Claudia answer that.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, based on what I've been able to hear from representatives themselves, they tend to like folks coming to them in the summer, early summer, and it could be, an email, it could be asking for a specific time to meet with your representatives, right? So something that in the past I've seen done is just actually physically going into the Capitol and going to, such and such representative's office. And if they're there, you can call on them and they can come out and talk to you. And that's why that last point I mentioned on one of the slides was if you want to have a tour of the Capitol or a specific face-to-face engagement, that is totally possible as long as they have the time to meet with you. So Yeah, as early as May, right, or even June. I know that it just kind of depends on maybe how extensive you think your idea needs to go. But early summer is probably advisable, so that way you have plenty of time to, conduct enough communication. That research portion, I think, is on the representatives themselves, right? They'll work with legal counsel on checking and making sure what other, state code or statute might be affected by this idea. But it's great, and it's a great summer project, I have to say. As a high schooler, I explored that idea. I think it was just kind of like a tester, but I had a wonderful opportunity to meet with my senator at the time, which was Senator Escamilla, and she was so gracious in providing time and effort, and it was a very cool experience because as a 16-year-old, you feel like there's all these important people with much more important things to do, but you are as important to, as any meeting that your representative might be going to, because they are there to serve you. So
Excellent. Thank you. Right. I've scrolled through. We do not have any further questions. So I have one last one, just but then I'll let you guys think about it and then just have any wrap-up thoughts, and then we will be done for the evening. This has been so fascinating. Um, so final question being, as we think of thoughts, is what's the difference between a bill sponsor and a floor sponsor? Like
Yeah, that's a little confusing. The bill sponsor is the legislator who had the original idea. They're the one who opened the bill. So they're the one who contacted our office and we work with primarily. The floor sponsor just means the other chamber. So if you're a senator and you have your Senate bill, it's SB 10, you need a floor sponsor to help push it through the House. So that would be a House floor sponsor. And that's just a representative who's willing to be the sponsor on the other side. And the same thing, if you had a House bill, you need a senator to help you on the other chamber. So you'll find a floor sponsor who's a senator. I have no idea why it's called that, and it's very confusing.
again, just demystifying the process. So thank you for that quirky question. So do either of you have any wrap-up thoughts of just anything we've learned, anything that our community members can take away from this today?
yeah, I'll do one last plug on getting involved with state boards and commissions if you have that interest. I don't know if maybe I'll share my screen just really, really quickly so that you see kind of the process here. So I already put this link in the chat, and I know that doesn't get saved, but maybe as a follow-up in the slides that I have, you can see. But there are just hundreds of boards out there across our state system. From there's I think a board on fishing and kind of outdoor recreation in that sense. There's all those the two commissions that are under our division. So if you have specific interests or skill sets to contribute in terms of maybe an issue that you want to advance, throughout the year beyond the session, consider maybe applying for a board or applying for a commission. That's just one additional way to get civically engaged through the state experience. And I know that there are just so many openings, right? We're always struggling to find people that have the time or have the interest or commitment to serve on these boards. But that's also part of our division, right? Just trying to get the word out there, especially if maybe you're from a community that you haven't quite been engaged or fully represented in certain spaces. So that's I don't know that that's something that's totally on the forefront when we think of civic engagement, right? We might think of voting, we might think of maybe even running for office, but there are just many ways for you to stay plugged into how our state system works, and that's just one of the ways.
Yeah, I would echo what Claudia's saying. Like, just get involved at whatever level you can. Our process is better the more voices that are in it. And it can be frustrating, and it is definitely time consuming at times. These public servants put in a lot of their personal time, but it can be really rewarding and fun too. And I'll maybe wrap up with one of my favorite stories from the legislature, although it's kind of a downer to end on. But there was a class in West Jordan who reached out to their legislator. And again, these legislators don't have big staffs. I mean, they have us, but we're not dedicated to individual legislators. So it's not like you have to wade through a bunch of people to actually get a hold of your legislator. And so they reached out to their legislator and they wanted to create the state pet, and they decided that should be the golden retriever. And so I wrote a bill to create the golden retriever as the state pet. And the legislator numbered it. And so it came out and it went to committee. And of course, the committee had a discussion about dogs versus cats. But they passed it out. And then it went to the House floor. And believe it or not, as the fourth grade class sat in the balcony of the House chamber, excited to watch their bill pass out of the House, the legislature broke out into a discussion about whether they should spend time on debating the state pet. And they honestly spent 15 to 20 minutes debating whether or not they should have this debate. And they ended up killing the bill. And it was a really sad moment learning about democracy for those kids. So it's still fun and entertaining, and you should get engaged.
Thank you so much, Claudia. That is heartbreaking, by the way. I'm just like, but humorous and sad, and I guess almost epitomizes the process of all the feelings that you can feel getting involved in state legislature, but being able to have the real applicability and approachability, like accessibility of being able to do it. It's not as hard as you think, and you can get straight to your legislator. So thank you guys so much for your time, for your energy, your passion, your knowledge and experience. And as we're reading in here, it's like making it so less daunting in our chat. So thank you for helping our communities stay connected and be informed and know how that they can help better their communities through their own engagement. So thank you very much. Thank you for our participants. You make Let's Be Neighbors a wonderful thing, and we love being able to connect with you. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you guys next time.